Excellencies, ministers, honoured officials from the multilateral agencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, the third session of the Global Small Island Developing States Leaders, also known as SIDS. My name is Juliet Foster, and over the next 90 minutes, I shall be guiding you through what I believe will be a lively and thought-provoking debate on SIDS and technologies of communication and information. The organisers of GSL are grateful for the very kind sponsorship of Bayer in supporting these debates at transnational level. So thank you so much for your support. Let's now focus on the topic in hand. It's fair to say that the growth of technology has been nothing short of extraordinary, and that staggering rate of advance is showing few signs of slowing down. If you want to know just how staggering it is, then I'm about to dazzle you with some figures. By 2025, some 38.6 billion smart devices around the world will be collecting, analysing and sharing data. The web hosting services market is poised to generate over $77 billion. And currently, 4.66 billion of us around the world are internet users, although I suspect that figure has gone up since I first wrote it down. So what does that mean for small island states? Well, these states are among the beneficiaries of what futurologists have dubbed the fourth industrial revolution. Information communication technology is expected to mitigate some of the challenges that SIDS typically face because of their geographical remoteness, especially by facilitating access to product and service suppliers. The bottom line is that ICD is the foundation enabling SIDS to diversify their economies, boost their manufacturing output, obtain greater access to global supply and value chains, and improve their disaster preparedness, points that were highlighted in the 2014 Samoa SIDS Pathway UN report. Well, 7 years on from that historic publication, SIDS are continuing to make big, important strides in terms of the affordability and universality of their ICT networks. Mobile broadband coverage across the SIDS now covers 85% of the population, while the price of 500 megabits of mobile data has dropped from 15% of gross national income per capita to 8%. At the same time, the percentage of individuals living and working on these islands using the internet has risen to 56% between 2014 and 2018. So this is essentially a good news story, except the progress does conceal many challenges for small islands. Research points to ICT skills shortages, making it difficult to derive benefits from increasing upstream technology. There's also the issue of take-up. In the small island of Cabo Verde, just off the African continent, for example, around half of the population not using the internet said the most important reason why they didn't take it up was because they didn't know how to use it. Not to be forgotten in this debate is the continuing gender challenge in digital employment in some SIDS. In other words, how can we do more to back up the development of women in technology and digital entrepreneurship? So if you could, panel, I would like you to hold those thoughts because we are going to explore each of them with the help of our distinguished panel, of course, who've been drawn from the small islands themselves and, of course, experts from the UN family of organizations. They will each give a 5-minute speech outlining their position. And can I stress it has to be 5 minutes as we do have quite a lot of ground to cover in the time that we are together. And after those 5-minute presentations, I will ask each of you a question, and there will be more general questions towards the end of the session. I would like to invite to the floor His Excellency Jean-Paul Carteron, who is Ambassador of the Solomon Islands to UNESCO and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Ambassador Carteron is the co-founder of the GSL initiative with his colleague, Ambassador David Doyle. Donc, Monsieur Ambassadeur Carteron, bienvenue à cet environnement et la parole est maintenant à vous.
Thank you, Juliette. Thank you to David. Thanks to him, we started with this GSL initiative and it is expanding now month after month. We have two main partners who are Seychelles, with the support of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radegonde of Seychelles. We have also Dominican Republic with the support of Mario Arvelo, who is the ambassador of Dominican Republic to FAO. And we are expecting in the next week to come a number of other delegations, other governments joining us in order to implement this new concept of transversal diplomacy that we wish for the future in order to address concretely the main issues related to small islands. I would like to thank Bayer. Bayer, we saw a beautiful movie or presentation. Bayer is supporting us, and I welcome Natasha Santos. Natasha is a brilliant and respected woman, highly qualified, and her activity at Bayer Crop Science Division as Vice President and Head of Stakeholder Strategy and Affairs is key for addressing issues of agriculture, food, and food security. She will speak about a very special issue, which is digital tools which are transforming agriculture and improving the life of millions of persons, improving or being in position of improving if we develop them. We will have also, and I would like just to say in a few words who are our guests. I thank all of them for accepting to participate in this debate. Angel Miguel Moratinos. Moratinos is the United Nations Under Secretary General, holding the post of High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. If you did not have the opportunity to verify the activities of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, I would suggest that you inform yourself, because it's a very, very key and important initiative of United Nations. He was Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs and very respected EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process. He worked a lot in the Middle East, and it would be useless to introduce Mr. Moratinos. Mr. Courtenay-Rattray is the United Nations High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. Thank you, Mr. Rattray. You are the person in charge of all these issues in New York. And I know that when you were ambassador of Jamaica to United Nations, you already served as co-chair of the group of friends of the Sustainable Development Goals financing. Peter Kenny-Laurea, co-president of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. Mr. Kenny-Laurea is MP in Solomon Islands. He is actually, for him, it is midnight. Thank you to be with us. It's late. You served as an international civil servant in the United Nations Secretariat in New York, and as permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Honiara. Altai Sengizer, with a recording contribution because at the last moment he could not make it, is president of the General Conference of UNESCO, actually, and he will chair this conference in a few weeks when we open it. Malcolm Johnson, ITU Deputy Secretary General, replacing Gulin Zhao, the Secretary General. Mr. Johnson is one of the most respected ICT experts in the world, and his role as ITU is now key as far as so many post-COVID issues have to be addressed. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, also to be with us. Nikhil Seth, I will say that we are close friends. Nikhil Seth is the Executive Director of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. He has 30 years of service as an international and national civil servant and a wealth of experience in leading, supporting, and managing complex portfolios, intergovernmental process, including United Nations conferences in the economic, social, and environment fields. He served as the head of the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, and I like that Nikhil is with us today because so many issues are related to his competence and his experience, and we wait for him to share it with us. And finally, I would like to thank Juliette, because Juliette has been accompanying us during the first sessions, now with these ICT sessions. And be sure, Juliette, that we appreciate your dedication, your time, your energy, your competence. And now I give you the floor back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Ambassador. Je vous remercie. That's the last of my French. In fact, I'm not going to inflict more of it on you, but thank you so much for that wonderful address. But we are not done yet. I am going to ask you some further questions, but before that, let me extend my gratitude to the other co-founding partner of this GSL event, His Excellency David Doyle, Ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to UNESCO, also a long-standing international diplomat based in mainland Europe. So, Ambassador Doyle, let me turn the spotlight on you. From your perspective, can you gauge the progress that small island developing states are making in terms of improving their connectivity levels? Is it really a simple case of good, bad, or perhaps more room for improvement?
Well, quite visibly, there are huge gaps. It's very much a question of room for improvement. And just to go back to Under Secretary Rattray's point that something like 52% of all citizens have access to the internet. I mean, the question must arise, this is a chicken and egg situation. Is it because they lack the connectivity, or is it some other reason? Let me just focus, I think, my answer on optimal broadband performance. And, empirical evidence shows with some conviction that if small island developing state governments, with the help of international organizations, can achieve a maximum optimal broadband performance, it has two major implications for these small island states. One, it can greatly improve market coordination. It can reduce information discord and asymmetries, and it can also, of course, greatly reduce transactional costs. All of this triggers, of course, the opening of new economic activities in the E area. Look at countries like Estonia, a small country that has gone completely digitalized, and it's done so with the help of optimal broadband performance. And the second area, where again empirical evidence is showing some degree of evidence that by making these investments in broadband, it has significant, but very significant implications in terms of student performance and achievement, particularly at primary school level. So, I mean, quite visibly, these are two important issues where ICT has some direct implications. But there are four, as I see it, major challenges that small island states have to overcome. The first is ensuring competition quality. It's not just enough to show that they have sufficient quantity of competition, but we also need the right quality as well, which can help to drive down costs, improve coverage, and improve, obviously, the quality of services. Secondly, duopoly. And this, again, seems to be a general consensus on the part of ICT experts that a small market size is not an excuse to sustain a duopoly type situation. Thirdly, the impact of so-called over-the-top internet services. These go beyond cable, broadcasting, and satellite TV to provide a range of services like WhatsApp and Skype, which have actually led to a massive reduction across the SIDS in terms of traditional fixed telephony services. But the issue is it has to be part of this new over-the-top, as it were, internet type services have to be part of the overall ICT mix. And last but not least, and the critical issues for me, is securing improved international connectivity via submarine cable networks. And again, there's an overwhelming consensus showing that those SIDS countries that do not operate or are not linked up to submarine cable operations have a distinct competitive disadvantage. So let me just talk about 4 areas that SIDS could consider in terms of expanding its broadband connectivity. First of all, piggybacking. There's actually a lot of evidence to show that submarine cables planned in certain destinations or already in existence bypass many small island developing states in the Pacific and the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean and elsewhere. And in some cases, they pass very close by individual member states of small islands who have either a single, as it were, link or may have no link whatsoever. There seems to be a lot of compelling evidence to show that we need a legal instrument, we need a legal framework, and this is where international organizations like the ITU, UNITAR, maybe UNESCO can intervene to ensure and work with SIDS in terms of developing appropriate policies for piggybacking vis-a-vis links, submarine cable links vis-a-vis other members, other states. Secondly, island hopping, the notion that a group of small island states can actually pool resources, which is more effective in terms of the necessary economies of scale and to justify the return of investment. Minimizing barriers to entry is another important issue. We still have massive barriers. This may require, of course, to provide major ICT companies with tax waivers, wholesale access to local markets, reducing overheads such as licensing fees, land costs for landing stations, and low cable landing fees. A combination of those could help to provide a much more attractive inward investment environment. And the other major issue linked to this, of course, is the ensuring open access, ensuring that that ownership and control by 1 or 2 maximum providers does not become, as it were, the modus operandi. It's quite visibly not the way forward. But in order to do this, you need to have, and governments need to adopt an open access policy. In other words, the same conditions for all the operators who would probably require the governments to set up a special purpose vehicle in which operators across the world would purchase shares that provide them with access to amount of bandwidth corresponding to the size of their actual share investment. And last but not least, regional hubs. I think there's a number of cases, notably in the Pacific, where significant transit points and hubs already exist in countries like Fiji, which have been used by Tonga, Vanuatu, Samoa, in order to ensure onward connectivity via Australia and the United States. But let me just, as it were, conclude by saying all of this does not obviate the need to have a national ICT strategy. And this, again, is where international organizations, notably those on this particular panel, can help sit down with these small island developing states and work out a structured, tangible national ICT strategy that suits each of the member states in turn. Last but not least, clearly there are issues relating to skills or skill gaps that need to be filled. And indeed, the research is showing that these skill gaps are sometimes more important than the development of hardware limitations. But clearly these need to be put into the mix in looking very carefully at the national ITC strategy. Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you very much for that response, Ambassador Doyle. And I actually want to pick up on something which you mentioned there. That was the duopoly. And I want to put this out to our audience. And in fact, Peter Canelleri, if you can address this point, because look, the duopoly, does it hamper choice in small island developing states? And more to the point, does it also impede the level of take up?
Yeah, I think that definitely has an impact, and I think it differs as you go from island to island as well, in terms of the actual impact of those duopoly. But I think the main challenges that is faced perhaps for majority of the SIDS is really the issue of cost. That regardless of who is the player in town, internet costs are generally quite high already, and that is just something that always comes down to the perhaps the size of the market not being big enough to perhaps investors make money from. But I think those are some of the challenges going forward that we can really look into. And I think I really appreciate some of the ideas already by Ambassador Doyle there about these special vehicles, more work on the regional side. These are already in existence, some of them, but I think moving forward, I see those as low-hanging fruits, in terms of getting folks together and discussing really concrete things to address things like the internet costs and bringing those down. For example, Solomon Islands, we benefited from Australian aid, so they pulled a cable, our first ever fiber optic cable from Sydney down through to Solomon Islands, and in the middle of the Coral Sea, they split it up. One goes to Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, and one comes to Honiara in the Solomon Islands, and that was something that was given. Pretty much the cost was borne by the Australian government, and that was something that was made at a political level. There were, of course, geopolitics at play that ended up with that kind of a specific arrangement. But those are areas of opportunity that small islands definitely are always on the lookout for, and working together with partners together.
Yeah, the importance of partnership. And of course,
Yes.
Bayer has certainly intimated that they're willing to work with many small island developing states. Sadly, we've had to lose Natasha. Everybody has to go to meetings. That's always the tragedy of these things. But we will soldier on, because there is still plenty of ground to cover in the few minutes which are available. And again, I want to put this out to all of you, because clearly there is a lot of work that has to be done. Progress has been made, but there is still some ground to cover. Excuse me. Some ground to cover. What I'd like to know is what effect, what impact is that Gulf having on innovation in the region? Because the real danger is that SIDS are potentially missing out on the disruptive benefits from new technologies that we hear a great deal about, such as blockchain and AI.
Yes, I think if I can, thank you, Juliet. That is definitely something that I'm very much aware and very concerned about, us missing out. And I think that comes down to the fact that many of the companies that do set up here, of course, are profit, oriented, and they want to make the best out of that in terms of the situation in the market, including the high cost of internet and SIDS. But I think when it comes to the specific issue, the idea of that diaspora comes back. The idea that you have already out there some very well qualified SIDS. With SIDS, we're talking about population size; they're not very big, but there's some very, very high qualified SIDS around already that are willing to help. I think a platform might need to be set that they would be able to lend their considerable talents there, because I think you mentioned earlier as well, the brain drain issue is a real issue for small islands that will continue to be there. We perhaps cannot stop it, but I think we might need to be smarter in terms of getting small islanders on board and helping out. Regardless of where they are, and ICT is a perfect model for that, because they can work from remotely and help us out with our issues going forward as well.
Sure. And I'd like to put this question as well to Ambassador Doyle and Ambassador Carteron, because look, given the difficulties that we are seeing, issues about the take-up rate and the level of ICT penetration, etc., it is essentially uneven. The real worry is that some SIDS will be more or less advanced in their growth than others. And shouldn't we really be concerned about that, given that these countries are also dealing with issues arising from their geography?
Yeah, I can perhaps offer some thoughts here. I mean, one of the big challenges in any small island developing state, 38 of them recognized by the UN system, is a limited pool of talent. That's the way we refer to these islands. You get some very talented people, but there are very few of them. And when it comes to developing and building regulatory capacity, developing applications and services associated with ICT, SIDS really does suffer from a chronic shortage of both software developers and the kind of innovative entrepreneurs that enable and galvanize, ecosystems that are normally associated with bigger countries. But here, this is where again I go back to the role of international organizations, the UN family of organizations. The UN World Bank, for instance, has a very innovative, very compelling, successful entrepreneurship program for innovation in the Caribbean, which was launched a number of years ago, which helps to develop, high-tech startups through connection to several components with other large developed states. So perhaps what we need to do is to expand this World Bank Entrepreneurship for Innovation program, perhaps link it up with some input from ITU, from UNITAR on the training and educational side, perhaps from UNESCO as well, and maybe the World Bank, which has the financial capacity to be able to advise in this area of financing innovation. But quite visibly, this has to be done, though, on a transnational basis. It is not the role of any one UN organization. And we need to, I think, come together and build and galvanize the best of experience across the entire UN family, but also not to exclude, by the way, the European Union and other international organizations, and indeed non-government organizations that have some expertise in this area of developing software developers and innovative entrepreneurs. Jean-Paul, perhaps you have something to say?
Yes, the real question, Juliette, is the issue of world integration. If I speak of the Pacific region, David is coming from Caribbean islands. It is 8 to 9 hours of plane. When you go to Solomon Islands, and it is the closest country from Europe, the first one, just 2 hours and a half from Australia, from Paris, you must fly and spend time in airports for about 30 hours. So it is 60 hours to go and to come back. And we are talking of one of the specific issues related to the SIDS and to the Pacific, which is ICT. But globally, we should find a way of integrating these countries in the world concert. I welcome, since 12 years, I have been ambassador of Solomon Islands. I welcome from time to time delegations from the country I represent. And they are very competent, very active. We have a lot of contacts. Every minister does his best. But when he is back, he is in another world. And as Peter said, ICTs are the key to integration, but it is so difficult to realize integration because the lack of communication and the difficulties of traveling to these countries. So I have been pleading at UNESCO and other international organizations for Pacific to be considered as a continent in itself. When I was at school, I learned that Pacific was a continent. And now we are put together with other Far Eastern countries, and we are not helped in the way of integration. And it is a long fight, a long process. And I am very happy that a man like Peter Kenny-Laurea is now chairing the Parliamentary Assembly of ACP, because it is a priority. We cannot be out of the game. We cannot be out of the game because there is a lack of human resources. There is a lack of financial resources. The diplomatic network of Pacific states is very, very low. They don't have enough diplomats. They are not represented. When I go to FAO meetings in Roma, all Pacific countries are represented on the paper, but I am the only Pacific ambassador. So excuse me to say these words, but it is a real problem. And of course, ICT allows to do what we are doing, and it is exceptional that we can speak with Peter, who is actually in Honiara, and having this connection, but it is not enough. So I try to work, I try to improve the things, and we must, all of us, find new ways of what is called world integration. Thank you, Juliette.
And thank you for that, Ambassador Cateron. I would like to allocate the final question in the few minutes that we have remaining to Peter Kenny-Laurea, because look, we know that most SIDS operate on the basis of a small number of ICT suppliers, obviously because of their market size. But the challenge, I guess, is to ensure that international regulatory oversight is robust and at the same time sustainable enough to ensure that SIDS get a fair, transparent, market-driven contract. The word harmonization was mentioned earlier in this discussion. So how can you ensure this will happen?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think it's very much linked to the integration issue as well, that Ambassador Cateron just mentioned. Harmonization, I think, is one of these issues that even in small islands, there's always problems trying to harmonize, particularly in the Pacific. When we talk about regional integration, I think the Caribbean does it a little bit better than the Pacific, especially right down to economic. The Caribbean, I think, does that a little bit more better. Pacific, I think, as Ambassador Cateron Jean-Paul had mentioned, the geographic dispersion is just so large that it's in itself is really a deterrent to us getting into integration and, of course, harmonizing. So there is also this idea that we have still some baggage left over from our colonial masters. So a lot of them were the ones who were running the ICT after independence, even. Cable and wireless was everywhere. They were here in the Solomons for a long time, and then they was taken over by government outfits, still owned by big share by government. So that is how ICT has been running, and lately the companies have come on board and tried to get a slice of the pie. But I think in terms of harmonization, there are certain linkages that has some baggages to do with flying the flag, kind of a thing, with certain entities, particularly with airlines. You can see that everybody wants their own airlines, that sort of thing, and everybody's running at a loss. But it's just because of their pride and because of that a flag carrier that everybody does that. And to a certain extent, I see that as well with these fields like ICT, where it's quite expensive. The equipments keep on changing every second year, in terms of updating. It's very expensive exercise. If we need to be in touch with the rest of the world, these technologies are changing rapidly. And sometimes it can be quite a burden to try and keep up with everybody else, and we get left behind. So, for example, in the Solomons, we had that wonderful fiber optic cable that's been laid, our first ever. But when it got here, our telecom towers were out of date. So they were outdated. So we're still not benefiting from the real speed that we were promised. And that is because of our towers are not don't have the latest equipment to handle that speed. And these things keep changing almost every year. So I think harmonization, and when it comes to regulations, we will continue to depend on international organization with the ITU that will continue to lead and guide us. The World Bank has been very instrumental in terms of uptake and supporting some of the telecommunications companies here in the Pacific, but also in the Caribbean as well. In terms of that, I don't want to name these companies, but they've been involved, and I think going forward there will still continue to be a need for that, in terms of support for SIDS. It is just the way it is. Until costs come down, we are waiting for satellite to be a big player for small islands, because I think the overhead cost might be a bit lower in terms of infrastructure setup. As a member of parliament, I set up 7 satellite dishes for my high school in my constituency, which is a very perhaps in the Solomons one of the least developed constituencies, in terms of that. And I put them to the 7 high schools, and that has made transformative changes just in the last 4 months since I was able to facilitate that for them. And it's the first in the Solomon Islands. They have never done that in terms of other honorables working on that, because many people don't see ICT as infrastructure here in Solomon Islands. Infrastructure has still got that classic definition of a road and a bridge, and in the small islands, a lot of wharves and jetties. And yes, they do involve that. But ICT is a major infrastructure nowadays, and it's slowly starting to resonate. But until governments, including in SIDS, start to pick up on that seriously, we will continue to struggle. That's how I feel, in terms of that realization that this is a crucial infrastructure for us, just like that road that we've been working on for how many years now. So that is where I think we really need to work. It comes back to the national governments. Regional harmonization, I think, will continue on through the assistance of ITU, and that will continue for some time, and we look forward to working with them.
That's a very optimistic note on which to end this. To everybody here, thank you so much for your participation, and also to those of our panel who had to leave us because they had to attend various meetings, etc. But the contributions were most welcome, and there are grounds for optimism. There is a willingness for people to partner up, to work together, to bridge those gaps, because we've explored the importance of technology to SIDS states, the differences that they can make, and there's been no running away from the intricacies of the issues that are involved. They are very, very forensic, but there is no fear in taking these on and winning, because at the end of the day, the SIDS states, they have skin in the game, to take that phrase from you, Ambassador Calderon. But there we must leave it. Thank you so much, and good luck going forward, and I hope to meet you again in the not too distant future. Thank you.